Welcome to Rubin on Point, a podcast about cancer, resilience, and being human. I'm Dr. Dan Rubin, and together we'll uncover the true power of resilience, the strength to recover, adapt, and thrive through life's toughest challenges. Each episode will bring bold ideas, transformative practices, and inspiring stories that redefine what health, healing, and what the human spirit can achieve. And you're going to meet some really cool people along the way. If you're ready to turn obstacles into opportunities and live with greater purpose and courage, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Your journey to resilience begins now. Welcome to the Rubin on Point podcast. I'm Dr. Dan Rubin. This podcast, we talk a lot about cancer, we talk a whole lot about resilience, and we talk mostly about being human. On this episode, which is going to be really exciting because it's really pertinent to so many people out there. And if you're listening to this, pass this one on because this is about early cancer detection. And it's serious stuff. That's because I'm joined today by my friend, Dr. Richard Bernert. Thanks for being here. Want to hear all about your pathology practice, how you got into early cancer detection, what it means for the public at large, why it's so important, and how it's really saving lives. People need to know. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, Dr. Rubin.
You're welcome.
I'm pleased to be here.
We both live and work in Scottsdale, Arizona, and you are the COO of a company called EPISEEK.
Well, actually, that's close. Our test name is actually EPISEEK. The company itself is Precision Epigenomics.
Ooh.
And Precision Epigenomics is a clinical laboratory based here in Arizona.
Okay.
It's a spin-off from the University of Arizona College of Medicine in Tucson, where I happen to have trained many years ago.
Okay.
And it's really exciting work that's being done down there in the laboratory. We're focused on a global problem, and that global problem is not just cancer, which is huge, obviously. More than 20 million new cancer diagnoses every year in the world.
20 million?
20 million in the world.
Can we handle that?
We're not doing an extraordinary job because we're having 10 million deaths every year from the same number of cancers. If we bring it into the U.S. a little bit, the world is a very conceptually very difficult to get our head around, but even just the United States, it's more than 2 million new cancer diagnoses each year, more than 611,000 deaths from cancer.
Wow.
And why is that? What's going on? Part of the big problem is late detection. So while cancer in and of itself is a huge financial burden, it's very difficult for family, for patients, for friends. It has an enormous financial impact. That the real problem that we're seeing is late detection.
Late detection. Was there such a thing as late detection before we had early detection methods?
Yeah, so right now we have some people that are getting diagnosed early with stage 1, stage 2 cancers.
Like prostate cancer because of the PSA
Exactly,
test?
for PSA testing, for mammography, for breast cancer, colon examinations, whether it's colonoscopy or fecal test.
Like people can go to the store and get the Cologuard test and screen themselves?
Absolutely, yeah. There are fecal tests that are available. There are endoscopies. The Cologuard test is available. So
that's 3 cancers.
Right, that's 3. And the 4th one we haven't talked about, which is really a success story too, is uterine cervical cancer. So I was speaking with a physician in Kenya last week, and uterine cervical cancer is the #1 cancer in Kenya that's taking lives. And for us, because we've done a good job.
Like a pap smear?
Yeah, we have pap testing that's not universally available. We've had some impact with behaviors, using condoms for protection, minimizing HPV. There's been a vaccine that's developed that can minimize HPV infection. So a lot of progress has been made in some areas. But the sad fact is that, for a person my age, I'm not a smoker. So the only real screening option I have is for colon cancer. And frankly, if I'm unfortunate enough to get cancer, it's probably not going to be colon cancer. That's only 8% of the cancer. So I'm going to miss 92% of the cancers that I'm more likely to get.
You mean if you get a colonoscopy, an age-related colonoscopy, or do a fecal test, you're going to miss 92% of cancers because you're less likely to get colorectal cancer?
Well, even if I'm the best at getting screened for colon cancer and I don't get colon cancer, I'm not looking for esophageal cancer, liver cancer, stomach cancer, pancreas cancer. Those are the things that are more likely to get me just on the odds.
What about the traditional tumor markers like CEA for lung, breast, or colon? What about the CA19-9 blood test, which is they're tumor markers usually after diagnosis? Are these ones that can be used for screening, for early detection?
It's a great question, Dr. Rubin. A lot of people have used these to various success, and that was kind of the first wave following direct examination.
Sorry for the interruption, but I don't see it being done in the primary setting because my patients aren't getting these done. They're coming to us later. Please continue.
Yeah, you're 100% correct. And the reason it is that it's not a very reliable, these are called proteins, and proteomics is an interesting area that can be complementary for cancer screening, but currently it's just has such poor specificity. If we tested everybody that had an abnormal protein marker, whether it was CA19-9 or CEA, we would have tons of people getting examined that didn't need it. So they're not very specific.
What does that mean? So CA19-9, let's just back up. What is that?
Yeah, so there are different proteins that are produced in our bodies normally.
Normally, okay.
And with abnormal conditions, whether it's an inflammatory condition, whether it's autoimmune or chronic diseases, or with some tumors or cancers even, sometimes those levels can get elevated. And then they're floating around in our blood. Say a normal level might be 2, but if it's up to 5, maybe we say, hey, this might be inflammation of the prostate. For a PSA, this might be an early cancer, and it's led to a lot of intervention. So there was a time when the recommendation by the U.S. Preventative Service Task Force was, let's do PSA. If it's elevated, go to a biopsy. Okay. And if they see cancer, let's take the prostate out.
So if PSA was above 4, let's say, that would typically be like, then they
let's take a look.
But that may be an unnecessary procedural biopsy.
Unfortunately, this is one of those times where we were detecting small indolent cancers that may have died with the person instead of killed the person. So we ended up with a lot of over-treatment or over-diagnosis or over-detection of small indolent cancers.
Which are what? What are small?
Yeah, so think about prostate again as the prototypic one. Papillary thyroid cancer is another one. There are a lot of people that have these small cancers that are not going to aggressively injure the patient, whereas there are some cancers, pancreatic, liver, stomach, esophagus. These are bad players. They grow fast, they grow quickly, and you almost universally have bad outcomes if there's late detection.
What is late detection exactly?
So for us, we want to diagnose things that are early when they're stage 1 and stage 2. And the stages has to do with the cancer is limited to where it started. For example, if we're talking about gastric cancer.
Which is stomach cancer.
Or stomach cancer, yeah. If we're looking at stomach cancer, we say, is it small, it's not spread or metastasized, or maybe it's even just a little bit.
What is small, like 1.5 centimeters?
Yeah, something along those lines. Okay. Yeah, so there's, depending on the organ system, there will be different sizes of tumors that characterize what stage something is.
Sure.
Once it's spread to lymph nodes, in general, that means that it's stage 3. And when it's stage 3, while today there are better options than there were 20 years ago, it's a different procedure. It's not something that can be just necessarily surgically excised and off you go with a 100% cure rate. So as the tumor grows from a small stage 1 to a larger stage 2 to one that's spread to lymph nodes nearby, that's a stage 3. And if it's got distant, that's stage 4. The treatment really, really changes in those stages. So we'd ideally like to get everyone diagnosed when the tumors are early, small, stage 1 or stage 2.
Okay, so stage 1 or stage 2.
And not when they're stage 3 or 4, which would be considered advanced or late disease.
Got it. Which usually in later stages, as it's maybe transitioning from 2 to 3, that's in terms of stomach cancer, that may be when somebody's starting to get symptoms that have been going on long enough that they actually go see a doctor.
Exactly. And for some cancers, they do tend to present with symptoms or signs earlier. There's some cancers that unfortunately the signs and symptoms are so vague that people don't present to their doctors until they're later stage 3 or stage 4.
And I've been practicing for almost 3 decades here in the world of oncology, and I've seen a lot. And there are things that are frustrating, which are things that maybe could have been detected earlier. So I do not live in the world of primary care or family medicine or, a non-oncological internal medicine. And I was a proponent to family members of why can't primary cares just run a CEA or a CA19-9, looking for ovarian carcinoma with a CA125, breast carcinoma with a CA15-3 or CA27-29. I know it's old school by now, but this was back in the day, and it seemed so reasonable and shouldn't have been cost prohibitive, but they simply weren't doing it.
Right.
But that kind of doesn't really matter anymore because we have new tests out.
Yeah, but you're 100% right, and you're on the right track, because a lot of American healthcare system is focused on you're sick, how do I fix you, versus you're healthy, how can I make you healthier? And we're kind of a reactive system. And when I was in medical school, back when you were as well, it was a different paradigm. And now there are primary care physicians that are really focused on health, wellness, integrative medicine, functional medicine, to optimize health and not just take care of those who are sick. Now, I will say that our healthcare system isn't quite there yet. It's still very backwards in a sense.
As a whole,
it's still kind of reactionary. Let me wait until long-term damage has been done and then try to fix you.
What's the pathological basis of disease? It's like we had a guest who had talked about looking at a chart note. It starts out with the chief complaint.
Exactly.
Right? Like you have to have, and then the HPI was the history of present illness, not how can I prevent illness.
100%.
It's really entertaining
That's right on the nose, and that was considered normal for us. Is that there was no talk about how can we make a community healthier and have better health span and longevity.
Yeah.
It's what's wrong with you today and what can I do to fix it.
And that's because you're an MD.
Exactly.
And I'm an ND.
There's a
and
difference.
That was my schooling was all about that.
Yeah.
And we talk about the precepts of naturopathic medicine. One of those is treat the cause. Treat the whole person. Really take a look. There's 6 main precepts. When did you graduate medical school?
So I got out in '93.
Okay, so you're 4 years ahead of me.
Yeah, so it was a while ago, but I will say I was always attracted to. There was a DO school that I considered attending for the same. I wasn't familiar with ND programs at the time, but it was very attractive to me that it was more about the holistic approach because, it's like a lot of things. We can wait until somebody has a horrible heart attack and then try to fix their badly damaged heart. Or what if we try to make lifestyle changes so fewer people are having these catastrophic events? One seems to make sense, right? But with oncology, we're kind of waiting until people have bad stage 3 and stage 4, and then creating very expensive opportunities to cure. It would be like, oh, let's try to fix an old infarcted heart versus how do we prevent this? And we prevent it through earlier detection.
I mean, it seems like it would be less expensive and less burdensome on the entire system globally, but especially in the United States here.
I agree.
And aren't we supposed to have very good education? I mean, what happened?
Yeah, I think it's kind of I'm very optimistic because there is a change. So I would say in the last 10 years, at least I'm a pathologist, so I see fewer patients than you do on a daily basis. I'm the ultimate inch wide and a mile deep type of practitioner in healthcare. But when I go to a healthcare provider, the orthopedic surgeon just wants to look at my knee, and he doesn't care anything about my lifestyle. And this person only cares about my high blood pressure, and they don't want anything about my lifestyle. But I think it's getting better because a lot of the folks now, especially in primary care, who are leading the charge, are saying, "Hey, this isn't rational. How do we promote health and wellness?" And
well, they were burdened by well, just tell your primary care. I can't do anything. You have high blood pressure in the orthopod's office. Go tell your primary care.
Yeah, exactly.
And so the primary care, they were overloaded. They can't spend as much time with the patient, but they need to. That would be very frustrating, I would think.
I would think so too. A lot of my peers that went through that program, some are frustrated, but I applaud them and cheer them for the saints that they are. And part of it has to do with the incentives and behaviors. The current system, whether it's compensation drive, has certain incentives that reward procedures and reward doing things and interventions versus the things that aren't compensated, as well as keeping your patient healthy and flourishing, which should be our primary goal.
What was your journey to become a pathologist? Curious.
So I actually thought I was going to be a general surgeon.
No.
I really enjoyed the anatomy, the physiology. Seeing when things went wrong really excited my brain from a problem-solving point of view. But the neat thing about pathology was that we got to see all the interesting cases that everybody else saw and sent us in consultation. So whether it was an interesting rash or a breast mass or a brain biopsy, these were back-to-back cases that I found to be extraordinarily challenging intellectually and was a real tremendous opportunity to grow and develop.
What is the intellectual challenge in terms of being, with those situations, or being a pathologist?
Yeah, so it's really understanding the disease and the various ways it can present itself among different organ systems, among different age groups, and it's really one of those things that allows you to say, is this a cancer, or is this just reactive for example, an ulcer in the abdomen and the stomach, sometimes the tissue, as it grows and responds to injury and tries to heal itself, it takes on some of the same features that we see in some cancers under the microscope. And there's a reason for that. We can talk about that later perhaps, but being able to discern which is this cancer or not, and really helping the surgeon or the clinicians say, what, if anything, do I do next for this patient? And I was able to answer that question.
Well, it's all riding on you.
Exactly.
I mean, that to decide, yes, this is a cancer, this is not. So when you're looking at rashes, for instance, these could be cancers.
Absolutely.
And so, but a biopsy would have to be done. A lot of rashes are treated, this is eczema, or this is inflammation, or use the topical steroid, or this. But then when it finally becomes a biopsy, or if it presents and initially needs a biopsy, that means it's probably a pretty serious rash.
Sure.
And so my question, thinking about it from a whole body naturopathic perspective, or just a whole body perspective, were there ever times where you would see a rash, you would look at it under the microscope and pathologically say, you need to go biopsy something else in the body?
Absolutely, yeah. Okay. So occasionally we'll see primary malignancies in the skin, so squamous cancers, basal cells, melanomas, things like that. We'll sometimes see lymphomas or blood cancers that manifest that look like rashes on the body, but are actually lymphoma involving the skin. And those can be skin lymphomas or lymphomas from within that are involving the skin secondarily. And we'll even see cancers that go to the skin. For example, there are some diseases called like Paget's disease where an internal malignancy actually manifests itself on the skin surface. So it really is very interesting when you see a rash on the breast, for example, and you come back and tell the clinician, hey, this patient actually has breast cancer. This isn't just a rash. This is a malignancy. I
mean, to biopsy a breast lesion, there's probably some inclination that they at least might have the cancer.
100%.
I'm fascinated. I'm not a pathologist, but I think on the cellular level, I mean, now we think, more quantum, or we think more intracellular now that we think about organelles, but you actually see it.
That's wonderful. It's been a great career, and the fun thing about it was also what led me to finally decide to leave it. So as a pathologist, we're kind of like the umpire. The clinician sends a biopsy and I say balls and strikes, cancer, not cancer, eczema or psoriasis. But we have an impact and help drive the care for the patient. But what really got me excited about this liquid biopsy is that instead of just calling balls and strikes like I've been doing, we're going to do something similar, but we're actually going to get people diagnosed earlier. And so when they have stage 1 through screening, instead of waiting until they get a biopsy of a lymph node that's got cancer in it, and they say, oh, you've got stage 3 cancer. What if I could get folks diagnosed early this year with stage 1 or stage 2 pancreatic cancer and change their lives versus waiting a few years and having a lymph node sent to me, or a Whipple procedure where they cut out the organs and send it to me and I say, this is too late. You've got stage 3 or stage 4 cancer. The outcomes are going to be a little bit different than if we do it. So that's really got me excited about EPISEEK as a liquid biopsy test to get people diagnosed maybe this year when the cancer's more treatable, but less expensive, better outcomes, versus waiting a couple years when the tumor's already spread and there are fewer options.
You used the term liquid biopsy. So what is that? And are they using a knife to cut into a vein and you get some liquid out? Or?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Thanks for asking, Dr. Rubin. What we mean by it is that we take a biofluid, and this is the broadest term for a liquid biopsy. A biofluid could be saliva, it could be peripheral blood, it could be urine, it could be cerebrospinal fluid, any fluid in the body. And some people even use it for a lavage. If you rinse saline in your mouth and put it into a cup, that could be considered a liquid biopsy as well. But we mean it's not solid tissue and it's a liquid. For our test, we use tubes of peripheral blood. So a phlebotomist would take 1 or 2 tubes of blood, just like traditionally is done. These are special tubes. But we look at the blood, we'll spin it down, we'll isolate the DNA, and say, are there cancer signals that are floating around in this patient's body right now? And do we need to take a closer look at this patient, or are none of those signals seen? and this patient can go about their business and focus on other lifestyle things.
So you said isolate the DNA. So you don't care about cells that are in the blood. You care about DNA. Where does the DNA come from?
That's a great question. So back when I was having, I'm a proud grandpa, but back when my wife was carrying our children, if we wanted to know the sex of the child, you would have to do an amniocentesis and put a needle all the way into the uterus and pull cells out and look and see. Nowadays, there's more non-invasive testing. So a mom who's carrying a child can get peripheral blood drawn, and they can look at tiny little bits of the DNA from the baby inside the womb that's floating around and see, is it a boy or a girl? Are there any chromosomal abnormalities that I'm concerned about? So the same thing applies with little tumors. If I were to have a small lung tumor or liver tumor or pancreatic tumor, as it's growing, certain cells in that tumor are actually dying. So it grows bigger over time, but as it grows, some are dying. And when they die, they release that abnormal DNA that makes it a tumor cell into the peripheral blood, and it's floating around in my blood. So if I had a lung cancer right now, and I hope I don't.
Well, you checked yourself.
I checked myself, so I'm pretty confident. But if I had one right now, or if anyone has a cancer in their body, little tiny bits of that abnormal DNA are floating around in their blood, and we're able to collect that blood. We'll spin it down and get rid of the cells like you talked about. So we're only looking at the plasma, the clear part that doesn't have the cells. And then there are all kinds of other little things in the plasma that the clotting and stuff we don't care about. We'll isolate the DNA and then look for the abnormal signatures that are seen in cancer but aren't seen in normal tissues.
So this would be circulating tumor DNA?
100%. This is a circulating tumor DNA assay that looks for these abnormal signals that are seen in more than 60 cancer types. So it's really a broad multi-cancer detection test. So when I get a colonoscopy, for example, they've looked for colon cancer. If somebody gets a mammogram, they're looking for breast cancer. This is one test that can look for signals seen in more than 60 cancers.
Is it possible that this small test that somebody can get, we can talk about how they can get it, could actually send a circulating tumor DNA signal that can be found before a colonoscopy could find a small cancer, or before a mammography could detect a suspicious abnormality?
I want to emphasize that this should be done, in my view, and in view of most folks that are doing this kind of research, that these assays should be done in addition to, not instead of, the conventional assays. But
why is that?
Because it's still relatively early, and there are some procedures that we have an enormous amount of evidence on breast and cancer. Pap testing we talked about earlier on, how that works wonderfully for cervical cancer. So we wouldn't want to jettison the regular screening procedures. This I think is a complement to those things. Now, if somebody doesn't want to get a colonoscopy for a number of reasons, there are fecal tests, and like we talked about, the Cologuard test. But if they don't want to do any of those, then the best test is the one that gets done. So if people don't get anything done, then that's a catastrophe in my view. So I would rather have them do the EPISEEK test or any other kind of screening test to do some cancer screening than not do any screening at all.
Now we know that we talked about the PAP, we talked about the colonoscopy, we talked about PSA. I mean, there's only a few cancers that we can screen for in sort of the old style method. This is a new style, which looks for 60 plus different types of cancer.
Right.
So even if you do the old style screening, and they're going to, this is still relevant because you're looking for so many more types of cancer. And we're in a different world with different EMFs, electromagnetic fields that were different sleep patterns, different stress levels, different toxins in the environment, different viruses that are out there, different things that have been put on our body. So there's a lot more cancer.
There's no question, and it's affecting people younger as well, which is really disturbing in my view. And I think it speaks to what you're talking about. There's something environmental, whether it's stress, whether it's the things that you've mentioned, that's causing younger people to get cancer. And to me, that speaks to it being an epigenetic, a lifestyle thing, things that are not the way they're supposed to be. It's a life out of balance. But yeah, and the beauty of the assay is that even with the current screening methods that we have, they're imperfect for a number of reasons. Only 14% of the cancers that we diagnose each year are from screening. So most of the cancers getting diagnosed are not a result of screening. It's because people present, and when they're presenting, it usually means they have more advanced disease.
You said epigenetic. Some people know the meaning of that word.
That's
epigenetic, you want to explain it?
Sure. Thank you for bringing that up, Dr. Rubin. I appreciate it. But Yeah, so most people know the DNA is the sequence that we all have. So every cell in my body essentially has the same genetic code.
Okay.
But my skin cell has a very different job than my gut cell or than the neuron cell in my brain. Well, how does that work? So the epigenome is what helps each cell in different organs decide, what am I going to do with this enormous blueprint? So if you think of a giant Betty Crocker cookbook, for example, if that's the DNA, if you're preparing, a Mexican meal because you have a Mexican restaurant, you might turn to chapter 37 and focus on enchiladas and rice and carnitas or something like that. That would be like a skin cell is going to make different proteins than a brain cell. The brain cell might go back in a different chapter in that cookbook or that blueprint and look at another part of the DNA. The epigenome is what controls which part of the blueprint is folded and closed and not being expressed in a cell versus which part is open and that particular cell is making those proteins. With cancer, unfortunately, different parts of the book get open. So what's supposed to be turned off might be turned on or vice versa. So the epigenome really controls the levers of which part of the DNA is going to be expressed in a cell. And with cancer, we know that there are levers that are being pulled, and there are a number of ways to do it. One way is through methylation, which is a small little carbon group that gets stuck on the DNA. Normally when things are hypermethylated, they're kind of closed off and shut down. And if they're open, it means they're usually hypomethylated. There are also histones and RNAs that are involved. That the abnormal methylation of the DNA is what this test focuses on. And it's really just, in brief, it's just things that are supposed to be off get turned on and vice versa if the epigenome is not behaving. And that's really the target that we look at in that circulating tumor DNA.
Okay, that's fascinating. There was a lot of big words there. So in terms of getting back to epigenetics, what things can influence epigenetics? Can the environment, can people's thoughts, can sleep patterns, can family history, or how they go about their day, stress?
Yeah. So I think that's, all the things you've mentioned, I think, are in play. We know that the DNA code is relatively static throughout most of our lives and most of our cells. There are mutations that happen, and we know that there are certain genes that are responsible for repairing those damaged DNA when it happens. But the epigenome is fascinating because potentially 40% of cancers are preventable from lifestyle modification. So cigarette smoking cessation, weight loss, exercise, the things that we all know that we should be doing. So the epigenome can be greatly impacted by that. And what's interesting is that some of these epigenetic phenomenon actually can carry down through generations. So there were some studies that looked at the epigenome, and it impacted people that maybe had, there was profound fasting or famine, and it actually impacted the next generation. There are people that may be getting ready to start their family, and if they're living a very high-stress life and things are not in balance and they're trying to start a family, it's actually probably better to try to get your life in balance before you even procreate, because...
And then teach your kids that. You're talking about epigenetic influence for generations to come and how you can improve your family down the line. I got certain epigenetics from up the line, and I can help improve that and change it down the line.
Yeah, it really is a legacy that people pass on to their children, is that if you have your life in balance, a eudaimonic, I'm not even going to say that, if you have your life in balance, and you're able to, pass that on. It's not only good for your own health and for your immediate family, but it actually has, transgenerational impacts as well.
Before we dip into histones and especially methylation, and then really talk a little bit more about the test, there was something you said a few minutes back about there's cancer cell. If somebody tests positive by looking at the circulating tumor DNA, that means that they have a cancer in their body, and some of those cells are dying and sort of breaking open and spitting out the DNA. There's a lot of talk about that. There's a lot of talk on social media, and a lot of people don't understand that we have cancer cells in our body, but a lot of these have intact self-destruct programs that they never survive enough to form a copy of themselves and then form a tumor, so they're not clinically relevant. It's just part of being alive. Animals have this, insects have this. What does it mean that some of these cancers are dying and then shooting off this DNA, and then some are also living? I just wanted to clear that up because I think it's a big subject for people who are not in the medical field to really understand.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a great question. There are little tiny abnormal clonal populations
What does that mean?
That we can talk about are the earliest stages of cancers that are happening all the time. And it's surprising we don't have it more often considering how complex we are, and the number of cells involved. But there are abnormal growth every day. We have abnormal cells that are doing things they shouldn't be doing. They get mutations, being out in the sun too much.
Something goes wrong with them.
Yeah, something goes wrong. But generally the body has a way to say, look, before this takes hold, before it gets started, we're going to program it to die and die off, and it's not going to be a problem.
Intact programs for that to happen.
Absolutely. We have programs built into the system that are default. So think of it as like a quality assurance plan. If a tennis shoe comes off the factory line and it has the sole on backwards, it doesn't get released. If a cell gets produced and it's abnormal and it's a misfit, the body recognizes it, and the cell even itself can recognize, I've got a problem. And a lot of times it will just involute and kill itself through a process called apoptosis or apoptosis.
Apoptosis.
Exactly.
Yes, that's the
Yeah. So that's kind of what we want to happen. But occasionally all the safeguards don't work. And occasionally one of these clones, one of these little abnormal growths gets traction. And the things that are supposed to be in place to turn things off are not in place. So whether it's through epigenetics, often it can be from abnormal methylation like we've talked about. So if the DNA is not wound up tightly and it's open and loose, something might be getting expressed. The histones, these are little proteins that are kind of like a spool. That thread is wound around. It kind of keeps the DNA in a nice organized pattern. If those aren't working properly, it can open up and get overexpression. RNAs, little tiny pieces of RNA or ribonucleic acid, can also impact that. So there's so many things in the epigenome that are just fascinating, and it really helps explain the diversity that we have in our tissue types. When we have wound healing, we turn on a lot of things that we don't want to be unregulated, but for wound healing, it's essential. We turn things on, and then once the wound is healed, we turn them back on. We don't want continued blood growth to that area, for example. So,
it's a great analogy.
Yeah.
I mean, cancer as an unhealed wound is a perfect analogy where you just can't get past, that growth phase of healing and go to the maturation. But to be exquisitely clear, before we leave this subject, those cells that are the cancer cells that are created, but then they have the intact program and they're dying, early detection isn't about those.
Yeah, we don't want something so sensitive because everybody would have an abnormal test if it were too sensitive. What we wanted to do is design a test that detects stage 1 and stage 2, mostly stage 1, but certainly detecting stage 3 and 4 has applications for response to therapy, for surveillance. But our focus for early detection and screening is diagnose meaningful cancers that, if they were not detected, would go on and do harm to the patient. Detecting tiny little cancers that are 20 cells big and the body's taking care of it anyway, it wouldn't serve us well to detect those cancers. And this assay won't do that.
Can you explain methylation as it pertains to cancer, and then specifically how it pertains to the EPISEEK test?
Yeah, so in the normal cells, we'll have certain portions of the DNA that have methylation. So the DNA is wound up tightly and it's not being expressed. And that's a good thing for the normal state for that particular cell.
Methylation turns it off and pushes it down into it's there, but it's not being utilized.
Yeah, like the analogy earlier we talked about the cookbook. It's closed. It's closed and that recipe is not open. So we're not accidentally adding guacamole to our French food, for example. So that it's turned off and it's shut down. And methylated DNA, as a rule, is closed down DNA. It's put into the corner and it's not being actively expressed to make proteins. And depending on what cell it is, it might be, this part of a gene in a skin cell is wound down and tight, but in a lung cell, that same piece of DNA, we don't want it to be hypermethylated or methylated. It needs to be open so that it can be expressed and make proteins that are essential for that particular body part. So that's really how the methylation works. So it's in some cancers, we know that there are areas that should be methylated and closed but are actually open, and in other cancer types, it's just the opposite. So it's really a matter of different tissue types want different things open and closed, but with cancer, things that are not supposed to be methylated and turned off, they get hypermethylated in cancer, and so we're able to see that. Yeah, we're seeing the hypermethylated areas with the cancers we're looking at. And that's just because it's an easier technology. If the chemistry were slightly different, there are just as many opportunities to look for hypo or unmethylated areas in the DNA, but that's a little bit more difficult test to do practically. So we focused on those that are actually hypermethylated that shouldn't be, and that's how we developed the test.
Got it. So more methylation is what this is looking for, and that
Correct.
happens in cancer, and we can detect it. So who is the EPISEEK test for, and what ages?
Yeah, so it's probably good to understand the risk profile. So we talked earlier about cancer affecting younger and younger people, but realistically still it's almost 90% of the people who are getting cancer are 50 and older. So we don't want to be testing all high school seniors necessarily with the assay because the pre-test probability, the likelihood of them having cancer is relatively low. But if we set it at 45%, that's kind of our current recommendation. It used to be 50, but again, we talked about younger adults getting cancer earlier. So 45 and older for general risk people is probably a recommendation. If you have any risk factors, so whether smoking, family history, lifestyle, high stress, any of those kinds of things that put you at higher risk, then anyone 21 and older is eligible for the test.
Got it.
So anyone 21 and older can take the test,
Okay.
but we don't want to alarm 23-year-olds necessarily. We really wanted to focus where the cancer is currently, which again, mostly 50 and above, but 45 and above is probably the sweet spot if you're general risk. But if you have any risk factors or you're concerned about it, that's probably
So what
anything over 21.
happens? Like they get the test themselves, or they ask their doctor? Like, what's the process?
Yeah, so we thought it was really important. We're a mostly doctor-owned and operated company. We've got a lot of clinicians that are on the team, and we didn't want to go direct to consumer with this because it can be big news for someone to get that, hey, you might have cancer in your body. So they can go to the website, download the test requisition form, take it to their healthcare provider, and have a conversation with them about this assay. The healthcare provider will order the test. We'll get the result back to the healthcare provider. Of course, the patient can always get a copy of the report as well directly if they want.
Wait, before it goes to the healthcare provider?
We typically do it after, but there are some regulatory legal requirements. If the patient demands it ahead of time, we would have to comply with that, but that would be the exception. We've never had that situation. We've only had it where patients call for copies afterwards. Maybe they lost their initial report. But we would comply with the laws. But as a rule, we want to give all the information to the clinician because we recognize while we're part of the healthcare team in the process, we're seeing one small piece of this, and we want to have the clinician be the one who's driving that conversation with the patient.
And so do the physicians have to have accounts with the company, or can they just run through like a commercial lab?
They can run it through the lab. They don't need to open an account or anything like that. So it can be done very quickly, very easily. It's just fill out the requisition. You can get us the requisition, the order. We can take it from there, and then the report comes back to the ordering healthcare provider.
And what if the healthcare provider doesn't draw blood in their office? Where does the patient go?
So they can go to some of the phlebotomy folks that we have agreements with. We have a national contact with any lab test now, for example. We also can help provide phlebotomy resources. So if there's not one of those folks nearby, we'll put you in touch with phlebotomy services. Some of these are mobile services. The turnaround time is about a week. So when the specimen hits the lab,
That's pretty quick.
Oh, it's very fast, much faster than the other guys. Part of it again has to do with the PCR platform that we chose. And you remember from the COVID epidemic and pandemic, there are a lot of PCR instruments that are sitting around right now, and that's the instrument that we chose to pick because eventually we'd like to scale this thing. And again, this is a global problem that needs a global solution. So we wanted to make sure that eventually this instrument that drives it is available across the globe.
Interesting. What do the competitors use? What type of technology?
So there's another competitor that does ctDNA, and they use what's called next-gen sequencing. And in my view, next-gen sequencing is a great research tool, but it's not necessarily a practical tool for screening because it's millions of dollars to get the piece of equipment versus maybe tens of thousands of dollars for a PCR instrument, so much more affordable. The cost to run the test is much more affordable with the PCR platform. It's much faster. It's a scalable solution. And frankly, the next-gen sequencing platform has an additional step that actually beats up the specimen a little bit more. It's a little bit more finicky. So PCR is more robust. So that we talked about the circulating tumor DNA floating around in the blood. As a rule, your body doesn't want that floating around. It doesn't, viruses have DNA. And so the body generally tries to scarf up and eat that extra little circulating tumor DNA. Well, if it gets damaged on either end with next-gen sequencing platform, it's much harder for the test to detect. So we have a more robust approach to deal with damaged DNA than the next-gen sequencing platform. And one of the results is that, for example, our assay will detect brain cancer, even low-grade brain cancer, and their assay just isn't able to do that because it uses that next-gen sequencing platform.
Interesting. What about, so just like central nervous system tumors you're talking about?
Yeah. Okay. So we've had some patients that have tumors in their brain. Some are high-grade cancers, and the outcomes for those are not the best. But diagnosing low-grade cancers even earlier, anytime you can get an earlier diagnosis, it almost always portends a better outcome. And brain is one of the top 10 cancer types that are taking lives. We think that's pretty important to be able to detect that brain cancer.
So what does the report look like? Like, how do you report this? Is it just like you don't have cancer, or you do have cancer?
Yeah. So that's great. So it's always a challenge. We have reams of data that we develop in the lab that come off the PCR instruments, and we put into this machine languaging program that classifies. But we wanted to have, for a screening test, we wanted to have a normal versus abnormal result. So we basically set up the assay. We set up the performance of the assay to have a no cancer signal detected.
Okay.
And the specificity is 99% for that. So if it's no cancer signal, there's a very good chance you do not actually have cancer. That's probably the most important thing. The sensitivity we set up to detect cancers, but not so high sensitivity that we end up telling too many people that they might have cancer. So the sensitivity and specificity are kind of two sides of the same coin. If you have great sensitivity, you might have poor specificity, and then vice versa. If we had specificity set at 99.999, then the sensitivity, the ability to detect those cancers, would be too low. So currently, if 99 out of 100 folks that take this assay will probably get a no cancer signal detected. Okay. That way they know that we've looked for cancers in all those different sites, and they can be very confident that it's very unlikely for them to have a hidden cancer that they don't know about. On the other side, 1% will say we'll have a result that says abnormal methylation signal detected. And we didn't say cancer signal detected because we don't want people to say, oh my gosh, I have cancer. Okay. The way a screening test works, just let's talk about mammography. So with a mammogram, say there are 100 abnormal mammograms, only 5% of those are actually going to have cancer. The other 95 are going to have maybe fibrocystic change or some dystrophic calcifications or just things that are not cancer. But that's okay. We want that to work. We want to find those 5 cancers that are there, and that's how mammograms work. So that the positive predictive value on that set is 5%. 5% of the abnormal results actually have cancer. For our assay, it's 40%. So if you get an abnormal methylation signal detected, it just means that we need to look at you a little bit more carefully. We haven't diagnosed you with cancer, but the 99 people can go back about their business. This one patient with that, we're going to take a little bit closer look at them, do some imaging, see if they've got a cancer that's available, and get it diagnosed.
So when it says abnormal methylation signal detected, is there a specific type of signal where you can qualify it as to which tissue type?
We actually chose not to do that, in part the way we developed the assay, because with a positive predictive value of 40%, and that's the same for the other company that's out there, we kind of felt like it was building castles in the sky a little bit. So let's just say there's 1,000 patients and there's 10 abnormals that come out of that. So we know that 4 of those are going to have cancer. But those 6 that didn't, we don't want to tell them, first of all, they have a cancer signal detected when they don't have cancer. So we say abnormal methylation signal. And we don't want to further compound the error by telling, these 6 people, you have breast cancer or liver cancer. You either have stomach or pancreatic cancer. You either have, well, they don't have cancer at all. So we didn't want to compound that error. And I think that's one of the shortcomings of the other company is they're telling 60% of the people that they have a specific cancer type when they don't have cancer at all.
How do we know that those 6 people out of the 10 don't have cancer? I mean, maybe we just aren't good enough to detect it.
That's a great question. And the way we've decided, and admittedly it's arbitrary, is that we said if you don't have obvious cancer after 1 year with that abnormal, we're going to consider it a false positive.
So if it comes up as that was, there was a pancreatic signal, and you're imaging the pancreas, nothing there. You're running a CA19-9, nothing there. You image, maybe you do an ERCP, you do everything over a year, and it still doesn't show up, then that was a false positive?
Correct.
Okay.
That's how we've kind of decided arbitrarily. But your point is a very excellent question. We don't know that the patients who are don't have obvious cancer immediately after the EPISEEK test, we don't know that they don't have cancer. We just know that the imaging wasn't sensitive enough to get it. And that falls back to that question. Listen, if it's small, if it's tiny, if it's just putting out a little bit of circulating tumor DNA, maybe the patient's body is able to resolve that. And again, we've done them a favor by not pursuing it and diagnosing a very, very tiny cancer that might not have harmed the patient anyway.
Very interesting technology.
Thanks.
I have one last question.
Sure.
What type of impact has this testing had already on our population here in the United States?
So we've been in market for almost a year, and we've had many patients that have had cancers detected or abnormal methylation signal reports. What I didn't tell you is that, again, we're very clinician supportive and patient supportive. When we have an abnormal, either Dr. Ruth or I or another pathologist will call the clinician and have that conversation. And we've had a lot of conversations with clinicians caring for patients that have had abnormals and getting people diagnosed with cancers that had not been diagnosed. And that's very gratifying and rewarding. And it really has inspired me to continue to pursue this kind of work and have an impact.
You know, I do have one more question. I've been meaning to ask this. In the world of the oncology practice, there's a concept which I know you know, and it's called minimal residual disease.
Yes.
And so I was wondering for our audience if you could explain what that is and if this type of test is something that would be ready for use in the MRD, from the MRD perspective.
Yeah, so again, super great question. Thanks for asking, Dr. Rubin. And we're focused primarily on the screening space. So people with no screening, that's our current market. Our current market that we have a resource for, the EPISEEK screening test. I will tell you in our R&D pipeline, we do have other tests. We're looking at molecular or minimal residual disease. So say, for example, someone has a lung cancer, the lobectomy gets done, or there's an ablation therapy. Did we get it all out? Did we treat it all? We can look at the plasma before treatment and after treatment and see, did the level go down to normal, or is there still more disease left behind? And that can help guide care. Does this patient need additional adjuvant therapy, or is there nothing really to treat? Maybe we can avoid the toxicity of treatment for now. The same with surveillance. So we've done some research with oral cancers, head and neck squamous cell carcinomas of the mouth and of the throat. And we looked at people before they were treated, after radiotherapy, and then in follow-up. And we did see some recurrences, which is not unusual for that cancer type. But we were able to measure that response to therapy and then recurrence or residuum. So I think it's good. We've got applications in all those areas. We're working with the Mayo Clinic in Rochester on a small project for brain cancer residual disease. So very exciting stuff, very exciting things happening. And currently that is not available, but I think it's going to be available very soon. And you know, clinicians are known to go off-label and off-intended use from time to time. So I wouldn't be surprised if that happens as well.
Indeed. How do people find the test?
So the best way to find it is probably go to our website, which is precision-epigenomics.com. Or if they were to Google EPISEEK, EPISEEK, liquid biopsy test, they would find us. And just reach out to us, and we can help you. Call the lab, email us. There's a contact form available on the website, and that can be filled out, and we'll get back to you usually within about a day.
Wow, thank you. Thanks for all the info, and thanks for being here.
This is a lot of fun, Dr. Rubin.
Maybe we can, let's see what happens in a year. Let's do an update.
Oh, that'd be wonderful.
Awesome.
Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you for joining us on Rubin on Point, a podcast about cancer, resilience, and most of all, about being human. I hope today's conversation inspired you to see new possibilities for growth, healing, and strength in your life. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who could use a little extra resilience in their day. Remember, no matter what challenges you're facing, resilience isn't just about bouncing back. It's about building a life of purpose, connection, and vitality. Until next time, stay strong, stay healthy, and take care of yourself and those around you.